أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ألم تر كيف فعل ربك بأصحاب الفيل؟ ألم يجعل كيدهم في تضليل وأرسل عليهم طيرا أبابيل ترميهم بحجارة من سجيل فجعلهم كعصف مأكول.
I read from hadith number 3, I believe.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم اغفر لنا ولوالدينا ولمشايخنا ولجميع المسلمين والحاضرين. فبأسانيدكم حفظكم الله تعالى إلى الإمام البخاري رحمه الله تعالى قال: باب بر الأم. وبه قال: حدثنا أبو عاصم عن بهز بن حكيم عن أبيه عن جده رضي الله عنه قال: قلت يا رسول الله من أبر؟ قال أمك. قلت من أبر؟ قال أمك. قلت من أبر؟ قال أمك. قلت من أبر؟ قال أباك، ثم الأقرب فالأقرب. وبه قال: حدثنا سعيد بن أبي مريم قال: أخبرنا محمد بن جعفر بن أبي كثير قال: أخبرني زيد بن أسلم عن عطاء بن يسار عن ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما أنه أتاه رجل فقال: إني خطبت امرأة فأبت أن تنكحني، وخطبها غيري فأحبت أن تنكحه، فغرت عليها فقتلتها، فهل لي من توبة؟ قال: أمك حية؟ قال: لا. قال: تب إلى الله عز وجل وتقرب إليه ما استطعت. فذهبت فسألت ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما: لما سألته عن حياة أمه؟ فقال: إني لا أعلم عملا أقرب إلى الله تعالى عز وجل من بر الوالدة. باب بر الأب. وبه قال: حدثنا سليمان بن حرب قال: حدثنا وهيب بن خالد عن ابن شبرمة قال: سمعت أبا زرعة عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال: قيل يا رسول الله من أبر؟ قال: أمك. قال: ثم من؟ قال: أمك. قال: ثم من؟ قال: أمك. قال: ثم من؟ قال: أباك. وبه قال: حدثنا بشر بن محمد قال: أخبرنا عبد الله قال: أخبرنا يحيى بن أيوب قال: حدثنا أبو زرعة عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال: أتى رجل نبي الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فقال: ما تأمرني؟ فقال: بر أمك. ثم عاد فقال: بر أمك. ثم عاد فقال: بر أمك. ثم عاد الرابعة فقال: بر أباك.
In the version we have in the translation it says: ثم عاد الرابعة فقال: بر أمك. ثم عاد الخامسة فقال: بر أباك. نعم، go on.
باب بر والديه وإن ظلما. وبه قال: حدثنا حجاج قال: حدثنا حماد هو ابن سلمة عن سليمان التيمي عن سعيد القيسي عن ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما قال: ما من مسلم له والدان مسلمان يصبح إليهما محتسبا إلا فتح الله له بابين، يعني من الجنة، وإن كان واحدا فواحد، وإن أغضب أحدهما لم يرضى الله عنه حتى يرضى عنه. قيل: وإن ظلماه؟ قال: وإن ظلماه.
نعم. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So with regards to this narration, we started off with the chain. He says: حدثنا حجاج. This is Hajjaj ibn Minhal. Hajjaj ibn Minhal Abu Muhammad al-Anmati. He passed away in the year 217. No, passed away in the year 217 after Hijrah. Al-Basri al-Abid al-Hafiz al-Sulami mawlahu. And he was a great scholar of hadith. In fact, some have said regarding him, Al-Fallas says, مَا رَأَيْتُ مِثْلَهُ فَضْلًا وَدِينًا. I've never seen anyone like him in terms of his virtue and his religiosity. And he has around 58 places in Sahih Bukhari. So Imam Bukhari also narrates from him in Sahih. And he comes in around 58 places in Al-Bukhari. When we say places, look, there are certain teachers of Imam Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala in Sahih. When you study Bukhari, inshallah, you'll come across this. There are certain teachers of Imam Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala who he narrates from directly every single time. And he's always narrating directly from them. But then there's another group of teachers of his. Sometimes he narrates from them directly, and sometimes he narrates from them through a wasita. And this is very understandable. Even if a student, for example, studies with someone, it doesn't mean every single thing regarding that teacher he hears directly from that teacher. Let's say, for example, you study from a teacher. It's possible some things you studied from that teacher and you've heard them directly from him. And other statements of that teacher, other quotations of that teacher, other things regarding that teacher, you actually heard from other individuals. They informed you regarding that teacher. So for example, they said that so-and-so said this, but you didn't actually hear that directly from the teacher. So Imam Bukhari, rahimahullah ta'ala, there are a lot of mashayikh. When we were studying Bukhari last, we actually gathered all of these teachers of Bukhari, from whom he narrates sometimes mubasharatan, sometimes he narrates from them directly, and sometimes he narrates from them bil wasita, with an actual link in between him and the teacher himself. Even though he knew the teacher, he met the teacher, but it's not necessary he heard all of the hadith of that teacher directly from him. طيب. This is why when we mention how many times, like for example, as much as I've been mentioning so far, that this Rawi comes in Bukhari so many times, for example, we're not intending that Imam Bukhari, if over here he's the immediate teacher of Bukhari, like Hajjaj al-Minhal, we're not intending that Imam Bukhari necessarily 100% narrated directly from him each of these times. Rather, we simply mention he comes, like Hajjaj, we said he came in 58 places in Sahih. Now, in order to figure out and determine exactly whether all these 58 places were mubasharatan or some of them were with wasita, you would have to go and check each of the 58, which I haven't done. Maybe some of you can check that. And in fact, one thing we should focus on is all of the teachers. If some of you want to look into this more, although of course later on we're going to start going quickly. We're not going to take so much time on each hadith. But one thing to look into in al-Adab al-Mufrad is to compare the teachers of Imam Bukhari over here and mention on the side that this is also a shaykh of Imam Bukhari in his Sahih. The teachers that Imam Bukhari narrates from in al-Adab al-Mufrad, and cross-compare them and see, are they the same teachers that he narrates from in his Sahih. And in that process, if you come across a teacher who he has not narrated from in his Sahih, then you have an entire list that you gather. That, for example, there are a number of teachers that Imam Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala does not narrate from in his Sahih, but they are his teachers in al-Adab al-Mufrad. You have a number of shuyukh gathered, and I'm sure there might be some dirasat that are done on this regarding the shuyukh of Imam Bukhari in al-Adab al-Mufrad. How many of them overlap with his Sahih, meaning he also brings them in his Sahih, and how many of them don't overlap with his Sahih, meaning he has not brought them in his Sahih. So as for Hajjaj al-Minhal, he is also brought in his Sahih as well. And there are two programs you can use for this that are really will make everything easier for you. One is Jami' Khadim al-Haramain al-Sharifain. It's an absolute must for any student of hadith. It's a program that you can download on your computers, not on Apple computers, only on Windows. But it's a very, very beautiful program. In fact, it is لا يستغنى عنه. Anyone who wants to seriously study hadith and go into detail and knows Arabic, for example, and understands how ilm al-hadith works and so on and so forth, you have to download this program. It's called Jami' Khadim al-Haramain al-Sharifain. It was, I believe, King Abdullah, who passed away, Allah yarhamuhu, he sponsored it, or he proposed the whole team or sponsored the team that worked on it. And they had a number of scholars and engineers that came together and prepared this entire program. It's one of the most beautiful programs, specifically regarding ahadith. Shamila is good as well, but Shamila is more generic. It's everything, not just books of hadith. This is only for books of hadith. This is only for books of hadith, and it has amazing things. Maybe one day we'll do an entire, inshallah, an outlook on how you can use this program and how you can use it to study hadith. And then there are other programs that are actually specific to Sahih Bukhari itself, like Al-Mawsu'a to Sahih al-Bukhari, which is also very good. And there's a lot of discussion regarding that we can do. But anyhow, for now we say that Hajjaj al-Minhal, he is Abu Muhammad al-Anmati. He passed away in the year 217, and he is an authentic narrator. And Imam Bukhari also transmits from him in his Sahih, and he comes in around 58 places in Bukhari. Hajjaj al-Minhal over here, he transmits from Hammad ibn Salamah. And Hammad ibn Salamah, he passed away in the year 165 after migration. And he's Hammad ibn Salamah al-Basri al-Tamimi, ويقال القرشي مولاهم. And he was ثقة عابد. طيب. They say regarding him أثبت الناس في ثابت. Anas ibn Malik radiallahu ta'ala anhu, one of his closest students was Thabit al-Bunani. And one of the strongest students of Thabit al-Bunani was Hammad ibn Salamah. And you'll study inshallah in the books of Ilal, and you study Mustalah, there is something which we call Maratib al-Ruwat. And what this means is blanketly saying that narrators are either authentic or weak. That is not the most precise way of looking at it. that is not the most precise manner of classifying and labeling narrators. So if you simply blanketly say, okay, this narrator is weak or this narrator is authentic, that is actually, it's fine if you overlook for a general idea, but it's not actually the most precise manner of studying narrators. In reality, even if narrators are authentic, that does not mean they don't have maratib. They don't have levels between them. And sometimes these levels are relative. And the way you can understand this is that, let's say there's an individual. In of himself, he might not be too trustworthy. But he has one miza, which is that there's a specific teacher he spent a lot of time with. He was mulazim of that teacher. For example, in the past, they used to do mulazimah sometimes 10 years, 15 years, 17, 20 years of one teacher. One student would remain with a teacher for such a long time. And a lot of them, they would remain with their teachers until the teacher would pass away. Meaning they wouldn't leave the teacher and the halaqat of the teacher until the teacher would pass away. So they would remain mulazim in the company of their teacher for a long period of time. Now these narrators, even if in of themselves, they might not be the most authentic narrators. So if you actually compare them to all of the other narrators in their generation, the same time that they were, you might arrive at the conclusion that they're not actually the most authentic narrator. But when it comes to that teacher specifically, their version will always take precedence. And we will always prefer their version of the narration as opposed to or in comparison to anyone else. Why? Because this individual was very close to that teacher. He spent a lot of time with that teacher. He was in the khidmah of that teacher, and so on and so forth. And the closer you are to the person, the more you will be trustworthy when it comes to the knowledge of that individual. So yes, one is a general way of looking at narrators and comparing their level of authenticity and retainment and saying, okay, level 1, level 2, level 3, and just arranging them like that. But one is also understanding that there's nuance in that. Sometimes even if someone is from level 3, he can actually be given preference over someone who's from level 1 simply because that individual from level 3 regarding that specific teacher, he was one of the most closest students to that individual. So Thabit al-Bunani, he was one of the closest students of Anas ibn Malik radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. And Hammad ibn Salamah, he is one of the closest students of Thabit al-Bunani. And that's why they say regarding him, أثبت الناس في ثابت. He is one of the most knowledgeable ruwat when it comes to Thabit al-Bunani. So when the ashab of Thabit, when the students of Thabit al-Bunani differ, and Hammad ibn Salamah is on one side, 9 out of 10 times, in fact 99% of the time, the scholar of hadith would be leaning towards the version of Thabit, the version of Hammad ibn Salamah from Thabit. Even if in of himself, he's actually not at the same level as some of the other ones that are differing against him. Yes, there's more nuance. This is just one aspect. So Hammad ibn Salamah is a great student of Thabit al-Bunani. طيب, Hajjaj ibn Minhal, who we have over here as the teacher of Imam Bukhari, he is a very strong student of Hammad ibn Salamah. In fact, in the books of Sunnah, he has around 900 or over 900 marwiyat from Hammad ibn Salamah. يعني Hajjaj ibn Minhal أكثر في الرواية عن حماد بن سلمة. And for any one individual, one narrator to have over 900 narrations from one teacher, that shows us that narrator is mulazim of that teacher and he is from one of the strongest students of that teacher. So Hajjaj ibn Minhal, he narrates a lot of ahadith from Hammad, and usually Hammad narrates from Thabit, but over here Hammad is not narrating from Thabit, he's narrating from Sulaiman at-Taymi. And this is Sulaiman ibn Tarkhan at-Taymi al-Basri, and he passed away in the year 143. And al-Hafiz said regarding him, ثقة عابد. طيب, Sulaiman at-Taymi narrates from Sa'id al-Qaysi. Sa'id al-Qaysi, or that's how it is in my version. And also, in a lot of the versions of the work, you're going to find Sa'id al-Qaysi. In the nuskha of Dar al-Siddiq lil-Nashr, it's also Sa'id al-Qaysi. And also Dar al-Jawzi, you guys also have Sa'id al-Qaysi. Sa'id al-Qaysi. Naam. طيب, Shaykh al-Bani rahimahullah ta'ala, based on this narrator, Sa'id al-Qaysi, he said regarding this hadith that this hadith is da'if. Why? Because Sa'id is majhul, meaning we don't actually know who Sa'id is. This individual, Sa'id al-Qaysi, who is a student of Ibn Abbas radiyallahu ta'ala anhuma, we're not sure who exactly he is. However, in reality, this is not Sa'id al-Qaysi. What's correct over here is that this is Sa'd al-Qaysi. No, not Sa'id al-Qaysi. Sa'd al-Qaysi. That doesn't necessarily mean that in al-Adab al-Mufrad it's correct to write Sa'd. So this is an example of where I'm telling you the correct understanding over here is Sa'id. That doesn't mean you change it in the book. And instead of Sa'id, you change it and you cut out the ya and you say the correct version is Sa'd. It's very likely that if all of the nusakh of al-Adab al-Mufrad, all of them are writing Sa'id al-Qaysi, that the usul khattiyya, the actual manuscripts of al-Adab al-Mufrad, all of them had Sa'id al-Qaysi. So it would actually have been a mistake that occurred far before the later publications. It might have occurred by a nasikh long time ago. And in the riwayah, even if you understand or even if you come across a mistake where you're 100% sure that the nasikh, the scribe, because at the end of the day, these books, how were they compiled? Back in the days, they didn't have mass publications. What would happen is that a student would come and he would write down the hadith by hand. And some of them would pay someone to write down the hadith for them if they could afford that. Otherwise, the students would write down each and every single hadith by hand. It's possible they would make mistakes. And even if the teacher is saying it in the correct version, they could make mistakes. And the only way we would figure out if there are mistakes is that when you cross-compare and you go through a number of different variations and a number of different nusakh, then you can cross-compare and you realize, okay, there are some mistakes that are being made. But otherwise, the mistakes can occur. So, when you narrate, we don't change the actual matan. Even if we come across an area where we know 100% that there was a mistake that occurred in the matan, and the actual name should have been, like for example over here, Sa'd as opposed to Sa'id, it doesn't mean that we change the actual matan. You never change the matan. You simply make an arrow, you indicate, you make a line, you go on the side and you write Sawabuhu kada, yani the actual correct understanding over here is that this should be Sa'd. And you can look at these books, for example, look up these books and they will clarify for you that it was Sa'd as opposed to Sa'id. And sometimes what's more interesting is after that you would try and go and figure out and pinpoint exactly where the mistake took place or who is the one who made the mistake. And that's not as easy. Sometimes based on different hints you're able to figure that out, but that sometimes becomes very difficult. Like in this scenario, to be honest, I was looking into this, it's very difficult to determine who is the one who ended up writing Sa'id as opposed to Sa'd. Okay, but one thing's for sure, we know that this hadith, it should be Sa'd and it shouldn't be Sa'id. طيب, Shaykh al-Bani, based on it being Sa'id and not Sa'd, he actually said Sa'id is majhul, meaning I couldn't find him in the books of Rijal, so therefore the hadith is da'if. Now, so the versions or the prints that actually has the Taseen Tada'if of Shaykh al-Bani, after this hadith they'll mention da'if. Why? Because Sa'id is majhul. However, in reality, Sa'id is not majhul, this is actually Sa'd. This is actually Sa'd. How do we know this is Sa'd? In the Tahqiq of Shaykh Isa Musa Hadi, in his Hashiyah, he mentions that in Tahdhib al-Kamal and its furu', and likewise in Mizan al-I'tidal, and likewise in Tarikh of Imam Bukhari himself. In this same hadith, Imam Bukhari actually mentions it in his Tarikh. In his Tarikh, and in Al-Jarh al-Ta'dil of Ibn Abi Hatim, and in Al-Thiqat Ibn Hibban. All of them, they have the version, the same hadith, the same chain, with the wording Sa'd, not Sa'id. Okay. And likewise, Ibn al-Mubarak transmitted this in his book, which is Az-Zuhd, and Ibn Abi Shayba transmitted this in his Al-Musannaf, and Ma'mar ibn Rashid transmitted this in Al-Jami', and likewise Al-Musaddad as well, and Al-Bayhaqi in Al-Shu'ab al-Iman. And all of them, they have Sa'd. The wording is what? Sa'd. So it's like unlikely Imam Bukhari made the mistake over here. It's more likely that one of the nasikh, one of the scribes that was writing down al-Adab al-Mufrad, the manuscripts of which we rely on for this publication that we have, one of them most likely made the mistake and they wrote Sa'id as opposed to Sa'd. So in reality, this is Sa'd. In Al-Musannaf, Ibn Abi Shayba, hadith number 25916. Hadith number 25916. This is his chain. He says, حدثنا يزيد بن هارون قال أخبرنا سليمان التيمي. Again, as over here, comes back to Sulaiman التيمي. نعم. So in Musannaf, he goes through Sulaiman التيمي عن سعد بن مسعود عن ابن عباس, with the same exact hadith. The actual rest of the wording of the hadith is the same. It's just after Sulaiman التيمي, who is the narrator, who is Sa'id al-Qaysi? It's actually Sa'd ibn Mas'ud. That's what's mentioned in Musannaf. نعم. In hadith number 25916. طيب. So now, who is Sa'd ibn Mas'ud al-Qaysi? Sa'd bin Mas'ud al-Qaysi. Imam Bukhari mentioned his tarjama in At-Tarikh al-Kabir. He mentioned his biography in At-Tarikh al-Kabir. He said Sa'd ibn Mas'ud al-Qaysi This is in volume number 5, page number 53 in Tarikh al-Kabir. He says, Sa'd ibn Mas'ud al-Qaysi, Sami'a ibn Abbas, Rawa anhu Salih ibn Ghazwan. And then he says, وَيُقَالُ Sa'd ibn Atiq. They say regarding him, one opinion regarding his name is Sa'd ibn Atiq. Or he can also be referenced using the word Sa'd ibn Atiq. So his actual name is Sa'd ibn Mas'ud al-Qaysi, but he can also be referred to with the word Sa'd ibn Atiq. طيب, Sa'd ibn Atiq, Imam Bukhari also did tarjama for him as well in Tarikh al-Kabir. In again volume number 5, page 51, he says under the tarjama of Sa'd ibn Atiq al-Absi, he says قال وهب بن جرير حدثنا شعبة عن سليمان التيمي عن سعد رجل منهم أنه سمع ابن عباس قال يبر والديه وإن ظلماه. And he made the hadith concise, but this is the same hadith he's referring to, because in the end of this hadith is also وإن ظلماه. And this is the hadith that you be kind to your parents even if they oppress you. This is the same matan over here that we have. So this same hadith Imam Bukhari is saying in the Tarikh al-Kabir is transmitted. He mentions this same narration from Sulaiman al-Taymi, from Sa'd, both under the name of Sa'd ibn Mas'ud al-Qaysi and under the name of Sa'd ibn Atiq al-Absi, which led many to believe that according to Imam Bukhari, both of them are actually the same individual. The two of them, who is Sa'd ibn Mas'ud al-Qaysi and Sa'd ibn Atiq al-Absi, are actually the same individuals. And some said that actually it shouldn't be al-Absi. That actually might be tasheef as well. It should actually be al-Qaysi, because when you think about it, if you write the two together, al-Qaysi and al-Absi, it looks exactly the same, especially if you don't put the dots, like the way I've written it right now. It looks exactly the same. If you put two dots on top over here and two dots underneath the ya, then it becomes al-Qaysi. But if you didn't do that, for example, if you placed no dot on top of the qaf and you put one dot over here on the bottom, it becomes al-Absi. So even the way the actual skeletal form of al-Qaysi and al-Absi, because back in the days they wouldn't actually put dots, or sometimes the dots wouldn't be mentioned directly in the actual book, it looks exactly the same. The skeletal form of the two, al-Qaysi and al-Absi, looks exactly the same. And so some muhaqqiqun actually said that al-Absi itself is a typo, and it's unlikely Imam Bukhari in his Tarikh wrote al-Absi. He actually probably wrote al-Qaysi, and later on even that got that the tasheef of that occurred and also was transmitted as al-Absi. And the qarina upon that, or the reason we know that, is that in the actual عن التيمي عن رجل منهم, the actual wording of the hadith is ويقال سعد قال وهب حدثنا شعبة عن التيمي عن رجل منهم, and this one as well قال حدثنا شعبة عن سليمان التيمي عن سعد رجل منهم. طيب, okay, some said that even al-Qaysi طيب, so وسليمان التيمي قيسي. Sulaiman al-Taymi, and the Rawi from Sa'd over here, he is also Qaysi. Okay, and in some wordings of the hadith is an rajulin minhum. In some wordings of the same narration, after Sulaiman al-Taymi, he says an rajulin minhum, and from a person from them, from their tribe. And we know regarding Sulaiman al-Taymi that he was not Absi, rather he was Qaysi. He was Qaysi. So what is correct over here, guys, to summarize all of this, what is correct is that his name is Sa'd ibn Mas'ud al-Qaysi, not al-Absi. Al-Absi as well is incorrect. And, or we can also say Sa'd ibn Atiq al-Qaysi. Regardless of whether you say Sa'd ibn Atiq or Sa'd ibn Mas'ud, he is al-Qaysi. And the nisbah sometimes might be done to the father, sometimes it might be done to the grandfather, or one of the grandfathers that he has in his name. واضح. So over here we say that what is correct over here is, number one, this individual is not majhul. We know who it is. It's Sa'd ibn Mas'ud. You can also say Sa'd ibn Atiq. And on top of that, what is correct in his nisbah is al-Qaysi and not al-Absi. What is correct in his nisbah is al-Qaysi and not al-Absi. طيب. And you can look into this more. And this actually, we're mentioning this over here, but keep in mind, this is one of the beautiful components of ilm al-hadith. Ilm al-hadith is a very, very particular science. Someone might be like, what's the point? It's just the name and so on. No, this matters. This is everything. In this ilm, this means everything. Because if you don't know who the narrator is, you have no idea who's narrating it. Like Shaykh al-Bani said over here, for example, the hadith al-da'if. Why? Because he was looking for Sa'id al-Qaysi. He couldn't find anyone by the name of Sa'id al-Qaysi in the books. But in reality, that was a mistake that occurred on behalf of the scribe. In reality, it wasn't actually Sa'id al-Qaysi, it was supposed to be Sa'd al-Qaysi. And Sa'd al-Qaysi, we know who that is. And he's not someone who is questionable. We can accept his narration. So that changes the entire outlook towards the narration. واضح? نعم. So this is extremely important in ilm al-hadith. طيب, what is the hadith? عن سعد القيسي عن ابن عباس رضي الله تعالى عنهما قال. What does Ibn Abbas رضي الله تعالى عنهما say? نعم, this is موقوف. And at the end of the day, it's not from the statement of the Messenger صلى الله عليه وسلم, it's from the statement of Ibn Abbas رضي الله تعالى عنهما. And we mentioned from the manhaj of Bukhari and Adab al-Mufrad is that he also brings athar. And he doesn't only bring a hadith that are marfu'a, yani to the Messenger صلى الله عليه وسلم. طيب, over here, previously he was bringing a hadith marfu'a, he wasn't bringing athar. But in this scenario, he brought an athar. Why? It's possible that under this chapter heading, meaning to specifically prove Babu birri walidayhi wa in zalama, the chapter regarding being kind to your parents even if they oppress you, he could not find an authentic narration that would go all the way up to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But he did find an athar, so he brought that athar. And again, he doesn't have the same conditions that he's placed in his actual sahih when it comes to this work, so he's willing to bring a hadith mawqufa as well. طيب, Ibn Abbas رضي الله عنه, he says, ما من مسلم له والدان مسلمان يصبح إليهما محتسبا. There's not a single Muslim who has two Muslim parents. يصبح إليهما محتسبا. In the morning, he wakes up to them with ihtisab. What does ihtisab mean? Hoping through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah will reward him by way of his kindness that he shows towards his parents. إلا فتح له الله بابين, or إلا فتح الله له بابين يعني من الجنة. Except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens for this individual two doors of Jannah. And if there's only one parent, then Allah will open one door for that individual to Jannah. وإن كان واحدا فواحد. نعم. And if وإن أغضب أحدهما, if you were to anger one of the two parents, لم يرضى الله عنه حتى يرضى عنه. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not be pleased with him until he is pleased, meaning the parent is pleased with his child. Meaning Allah will not be pleased with the child until the parent is pleased with that child. قِيلَ وَإِن ظَلَمَا. Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu was asked, وَإِن ظَلَمَا, even if they are oppressive towards him. What if they are the ones who are oppressive? What if they are the ones who oppress the child, and not the child, he's not the one who's oppressing them? He says, وَإِن ظَلَمَا, even if they are the oppressors. طيب, now based on this hadith, if the parents oppress you in any regard, then you're not allowed to say anything back. And you shouldn't treat them in a way that you will displease them. We say this oppression, number one, it doesn't have to do with the akhirah, umur ukhrawiyah. It has to do with the umur dunyawiyah. Why? Because we already mentioned, لا طاعة لمخلوق في معصية الخالق. When it comes to the akhirah, there's no obedience towards any one of the creations if that entails within it disobedience towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Anytime in obedience to creation there is disobedience towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then there is no obedience to the creation. Rather, the loyalty lies with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala firstly. First and foremost, a person is loyal to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is his creator. That's number one. But in the matters of the dunya, if the parents are oppressive, over here we say there is, because sometimes this becomes a difficult situation. Sometimes this becomes a difficult situation. In reality, Islam has ordained rights for the parents and also rights that are upon the parents for the children. And the problem becomes that, let's say an individual is not granted his right. The issue when it comes to the parents is that the amount of ihsan that the parents have done upon the children 99.99% of the time is far more in comparison to any mistake they would have made with regards to that child and the upbringing of that child. Simply the pain that the mother goes through at the time that she is pregnant, for example, and at the time of birth, and when the child is young, an infant child, and how the mother cleans that child and takes care of him at a young age. The amount of ihsan, it's only until, when does the child actually start realizing that, oh, maybe my parents are not treating me well? That's maybe when he's 20 years old, early 20s, late 20s, for example. That's when he starts thinking, how are my parents treating me? Before that, or maybe 30s, for example, later on, when he grows up, when he's 14, 15, when he's, for example, 10, when he's a young child, he never thinks my parents are not treating me well. So, because the parents are giving him everything. So, the amount of ihsan that the parents have done upon the child from a young age is far more in comparison to any mistake that that parent could, for example, make regarding that child. And so for this reason, even if a child thinks that the parents are doing dhulm upon him, in reality, in actuality, even if they make a mistake, even if there is a degree of dhulm they did upon him, in comparison to the ihsan that they've done upon that child, that mistake is almost as if it's non-existent. Almost as if it's non-existent. Let's say, for example, there's an individual, a close friend of yours, that you help out a lot and you assisted in many matters. Or for example, a teacher helps a student a lot. Yes, at times a person can make a mistake. Like the person who has helped you and given you so much, when they make mistakes, as they say, مَا عَلَى الْمُحْسِنِينَ مِنْ سَبِيلٍ. And when someone does ihsan upon you, then you're not in the position to be questioning that individual. You're not in the position to be questioning that individual. That, oh, you're making this mistake. Well, he's the one doing ihsan upon you. So if you're on the receiving end, then you're not in the position that you can question the individual as to why he's not giving you what you think he should be giving you, and what you think that you are entitled to. And from this regard, we say that no matter how much a child will think that his parents are oppressing him, most likely the parents are, overall, if you look at it in a holistic perspective, from a holistic perspective, 99.99% of the time, the parents are the ones that are actually still doing ihsan upon that child. If you think of all of what the parents have done for the child. Yes, there might be some scenarios, for example, where the parents didn't take care of the child at all, which is extremely rare, almost non-existent. In that situation, maybe, for example, the child is really the one who's oppressed. Like, let's say the child is born and the parents, for example, throw him onto the street and leave him completely. And he never knows his parents ever as he grows up. So we say over there, maybe it's possible that the argument can be made that, the parents did do them. Otherwise, any child that grows up in the house of his parents, just the fact that they gave you a roof and they're giving you food and they're taking care of you and they're accommodating for you and they're going through all of this process to take care of you and protect you and so on and so forth, that is enough to understand that they are the ones that are doing ihsan and they are not the ones who are making mistakes. Yes, in some matters you might not agree with them. It might seem to you like they are doing dhulm, but in reality, most likely they're not the ones that are doing dhulm. Now, all of this with the condition that it shouldn't be a matter where there is the hurma of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His commandments are being overlooked. Now, go on.
باب لين الكلام لوالديه. وبه قال حدثنا مسدد قال حدثنا إسماعيل بن إبراهيم قال حدثنا زياد بن مخراق قال حدثني طيسرة بن مياس قال كنت مع النجدات فأصبت ذنوبا لا أراها إلا من الكبائر فذكرت ذلك لابن عمر رضي الله عنهما قال ما هي؟ قلت كذا وكذا قال ليست هذه من الكبائر هن 9 الإشراك بالله وقتل نسمة والفرار من الزحف وقذف المحصنة وأكل الربا وأكل مال اليتيم وإلحاد في المسجد والذي يستسحر وبكاء الوالدين من العقوق. قال لابن عمر أتفرق النار وتحب أن تدخل الجنة؟ قلت إي والله. قال أحي والدك؟ قلت عندي أمي. قال فوالله لو ألنت لها الكلام وأطعمتها الطعام لتدخلن الجنة ما اجتنبت الكبائر.
نعم. The next hadith, the next chapter, he says باب لين الكلام لوالديه, the chapter regarding using soft speech towards the parents. He says حدثنا مسدد, this is مسدد ibn Musarhad, and he passed away in the year 228. He passed away in the year 228 after migration. He says حدثنا إسماعيل بن إبراهيم. طيب, Ismail ibn Ibrahim, he's normally known as Ismail ibn Ulayyah, or he's known as Ibn Ulayyah. Ibn Ulayyah, and he is Ismail bin Ibrahim bin Miqsam. So he's normally known as al-Ma'ruf bibn Ulayyah. So we can see over here Ibn Ulayyah. And we're going to mention why Imam Bukhari did not mention Ibn Ulayyah, and rather he chose to mention Ismail ibn Ibrahim. So he is Ismail bin Ibrahim. He's a great Imam and al-Allama al-Hafiz, a very strong faqih and an Imam and a mufti from the Imam of hadith. He never used to like, so Ulayyah is actually his mother. It's nisbah towards his mother. And his father's name is Ibrahim. But he would never like to be called Ibn Ulayyah. He used to say that whoever says regarding me Ibn Ulayyah فَقَدْ اغْتَابَنِي, he's done my ghibah. He has backbited me. Whoever calls me Ibn Ulayyah, he has backbited me. That's why Imam Bukhari over here didn't say Ismail ibn Ulayyah, he said Ismail ibn Ibrahim. Likewise, Imam Bukhari, for example, in his teacher Ishaq ibn Ibrahim al-Hanzali, in Sahih, who's normally known as Ishaq ibn Rahuya, he doesn't say Ishaq ibn Rahuya. The majority of times in Sahih, he does not mention Ishaq ibn Rahuya. He says Ishaq ibn Ibrahim, or he says Ishaq al-Hanzali. He does not mention Ishaq ibn Rahuya. And that was out of his respect for the scholars of hadith. Although the scholars of hadith, they mention, like Imam Dhahabi rahimahullah, when he, after he quoted this from Ismail ibn Ulayyah, that he used to say that whoever calls me Ibn Ulayyah, he's done a ghibah of me. Imam Dhahabi would say this is not fair. Why? Because when someone becomes mashhur with a name, when someone becomes known by way of a specific name, then that's it. If your shuhra is only, like for example, over here it says Ismail ibn Ibrahim, and no one would have thought that, oh, this is referring to Ibn Ulayyah, because Ibn Ulayyah is normally known as Ibn Ulayyah, he's not known as Ismail ibn Ibrahim. So when and this is important because narrators matter in the book, in the hadith. If you don't recognize the narrator, you might be like, okay, I don't know who this is, and it might be one of the most amazing narrators. It's just, for example, if you take the name of Abu Hurairah, it's not actually Abu Hurairah, it's Abdul Rahman ibn Sakhr. If you found in the hadith an Abdul Rahman ibn Sakhr, and Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam qala kada, for the majority they'll be like, okay, who is Abdul Rahman ibn Sakhr? Who's this individual? When they see an Abi Hurairah, then they recognize it. So in the books of hadith, if there is someone who is mashhur, if he becomes famously recognized and known by way of a specific name, sometimes they're alqab, and these alqab sometimes they come from, like sometimes there's noble alqab, and sometimes there's alqab that are sometimes not the most nice things to say regarding people. But when someone becomes mashhur, and when he becomes known with that laqab, like al-A'raj, and alqab like this, they become mashhur with a specific laqab, in that situation the ulama of hadith, they mention that you can refer to him using that laqab. And the purpose of why you refer to him using that laqab is not with the intention that you're trying to look down upon that individual. If you have that intention, that's actually incorrect. You will get sin for that. That is ghibah. But if you do it with the intention to preserve the rijal and make sure that the hadith are preserved, and we know exactly who we are referencing in the hadith, to make sure that someone who is a weak narrator is not mixed with someone who's an authentic narrator, then this is something from the deen, and it's for the purpose of serving the deen. So you can actually reference a narrator even if he's recognized with a name or laqab which is not actually, he himself might not like, but he became famous with it. Now, so this is Ismail ibn Ibrahim, who's known as Ibn Ulayyah. However, Imam Bukhari, as we mentioned in the tarjumah of Imam Bukhari said that after I figured out that ghibah was haram, there's not a single person that I've done a ghibah of. And even in this regard, he was conscious. And this shows us the beauty of Imam Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala. And even in this regard, he was very, very conscious. Regarding Ibn Ulayyah, or Ismail ibn Ibrahim, he has a very interesting life, because he was a great scholar of hadith. But he went through certain tests as well. Number one, there's an incident which is mentioned regarding him and Ibn al-Mubarak rahimahullah ta'ala. Ibn al-Mubarak rahimahullah ta'ala, he used to spend upon the ulama and the muhaddithun. And the reason he would do this is so that they would not have the need to earn for themselves, and they would have time to simply serve the deen and nothing else. And from the ones that he used to spend upon was Ismail ibn Ibrahim. In fact, every now and then, every single year, Ibn Mubarak, for example, he would come and visit Ismail ibn Ibrahim, and he would give him a sum of money, some wealth, a pouch of gold coins, and he would say, use these, and they will help you throughout the year, and you don't need to worry about anything else. Until eventually, one time, Ismail ibn Ibrahim was approached by the state, and he was offered a position of qada, to become a judge. And he was pressured into it. And he wasn't as simple as saying, no, I don't want to be a judge, and you can get away with that. Sometimes he would pressure the individual. Sometimes, in fact, Imam Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, the reason he was in prison is simply because he refused to be a judge. And if you refuse to be a judge, then they imprison you. This would happen in the past. So Ismail ibn Ibrahim, he was pressured into accepting becoming a judge, and he became a judge. Next time when Abdullah Mubarak rahimahullah, he came to visit that city, he asked regarding him, and they told him that he had become a judge. So Abdullah Mubarak was not happy with that, and he left without meeting him. And Ismail ibn Ibrahim, and he knew that at that time normally Abdullah Mubarak would come and visit him. So later on he asked regarding him, and they told him that he was angry when he heard that you had become a judge, and he left. So he wrote out to him, he wrote a letter to him, apologizing, and he said that I wanted to see you, I wanted to meet you when you came, but you left. So Ibn Mubarak wrote back a number of lines, couplets to him regarding what he was doing. He said, يا جاعل العلم له بازيا يصطاد أموال المساكين احتلت للدنيا ولذاتها بحيلة تذهب بالدين. The one who turns knowledge into bazian is like a bird that preys on animals. The one who turns knowledge into this bird that preys on animals. يصطاد أموال المساكين, and through this knowledge you're preying on the wealth of the poor individuals. احتلت للدنيا ولذاتها, you're creating a hila, you're creating a loophole using the deen to earn the dunya and its pleasures. Meaning by accepting that you are becoming a qadi and a judge, you're simply running after the pleasures of this world, and you are selling your deen in the process. He says, فَصِرْتَ مَجْنُونًا بِهَا بَعْدَمَا كُنْتَ دَوَاءً لِلْمَجَانِينِ أَيْنَ رِوَايَاتُكَ فِي مَا مَضَىٰ عَنِ ابْنِ عَوْنٍ وَابْنِ سِيرِينِ. That you became infatuated with the dunya, even though before you were yourself a cure for all of those individuals that were infatuated with it. When they would look at your religiosity, and they would look at your zuhd and your disassociation from the dunya, they would look up to you. Then he says, أَيْنَ رِوَايَاتُكَ فِي مَا مَضَىٰ. Where are your riwayat, your transmissions that you transmitted from Ibn Awn and Ibn Sirin, and all these ahadith that you used to narrate? Where are they? وَدَرْسُكَ الْعِلْمَ بِآثَارِهِ فِي تَرْكِ أَبْوَابِ السَّلَاطِينِ تقول أكرهت فماذا كذا زل حمار العلم في الطين لا تبع الدنيا لا تبع الدين بالدنيا كما يفعل ضلال الرهابين. These are very harsh words, and all he did was accept qada. And Mubarak said that don't sell your deen for the sake of the dunya. If you need wealth, I spend on you. You don't need to run after wealth. I spend upon you. And it's not something that you need to worry about. You don't need to concern yourself with the dunya. So don't sell your deen for the sake of the dunya. And he considered, why? Because what they would say is that the state sometimes was not fair with the distribution of wealth. And they would oppress individuals, and sometimes they would take wealth from individuals in an oppressing manner. Now if you work under the state, and they're spending upon you with that wealth that they stole, for example, from other individuals, or they oppressingly took from other individuals, then it's as if you are earning from the that's why he's saying amwal al-masakin, the wealth of those people that were poor and in need, and you're taking from their wealth. Naam. طيب, as soon as he read this, he immediately, now, subhanallah, the Salaf rahimahullah, when you read their stories, the students were amazing, the teachers were amazing, everyone at that time, Allah reward them. And nowadays, if the teacher, for example, reprimands a student for a certain matter like this, the student will be like, you're not paying my bills. You have don't comment. And that's how we will think. May Allah forgive us. But he, as soon as he read this from his mentor, Abdullah Mubarak rahimahullah ta'ala, he immediately got up and he left Majlis al-Qada. He left Qada. And he said, Allah irham shaybati. He said to the Khalifa, or the one who appointed him, he says, have mercy, have pity upon my old age, and don't put me in this position. فَإِنِّي لَا أَصْبِرُ عَلَى الْخَطَأِ. Because I'm not patient upon making a mistake. طيب. There's two aspects of qada. Number one is the wealth, where is it coming from? And number two is the mistake. What if when you make qada, when you judge and give a hukum regarding Islam, you make a mistake? This is also something strongly, especially the ones that are going into ifta and studying, for example, writing fatawa and stuff. Read the beginning of Musnad Darimi, the Muqaddimah of Musnad Darimi. His Muqaddimah is a very beautiful Muqaddimah in ilm, regarding ilm. And in that he speaks about, this entire bab he brings regarding all of the Salaf rahimahumullah who were scared of giving fatwa. They were scared of giving fatwa. And they used to delegate and deflect the matter. They wouldn't want to answer on behalf of the religion. Always remember this, answering on behalf of the religion is not a privilege. It's a big, big responsibility. If you make a mistake, then it's on your shoulders. If you get it right, it's on your shoulders as well. But if you make a mistake, it's also on your shoulders. It's not a privilege. It's a responsibility. Yes, there is a need for it. And so we are not saying that everyone should just pack their bags and forget about it altogether. We need ulama that are going to fulfill this as well. However, if those ulama that are involved in this don't couple that with the etiquettes of majalis of hadith, and they don't lower their jur'ah, for example, or they don't lower their passion towards speaking on behalf of the deen, then they will end up becoming jari upon the deen. They will end up becoming jari upon fatwa. That is not something anyone wants to do. And you never want to become in a position where you want to answer questions regarding the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is not a privilege, yes. That is a responsibility. Wadah. Many of the ulama of the past, from the Salaf, they would fear from this. They would avoid this at all costs. طيب. So then they let him go. And Ibn Mubarak rahimahullah ta'ala became pleased with him. طيب. Adab says regarding this story that this is a hikayah munkara. He says we don't know the chain of this properly. So Allah knows best. But this is very mashhur. It's a very mashhur story that had occurred. But there's another thing that happened with Ismail ibn Ulayyah towards the end of his life, which is that there was a fitna that occurred where he made a mistake once regarding the mas'alatu al-kalam, yani hal al-Quranu kalamullah. He made a mistake in that. And because of that, a lot of the muhaddithun, they started labeling him and even though he made tawbah. So he actually made tawbah, he repented, and in front of everyone he repented regarding the statement that he had made. However, that kind of created a divide between the scholars of hadith and him, and for that reason there are some scholars that avoided him. Otherwise, the truth is, like Imam Ahmad as well, he has some strict kalam sometimes regarding him. But Imam Dhahabi rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, after mentioning, for example, some of those that spoke about Ismail ibn Ulayyah, he says that hadithuhu fi kutub al-Islami kulliha. It's so interesting. He brought the statement of Imam Ahmad, and then he says, look, I do i'tidar on behalf of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala that he was harsh in this regard, because Imam Ahmad was lashed and whipped because of the mas'ala of khalq al-Quran, the mas'ala that occurred with the Mu'tazila in the 3rd century, beginning part of the 3rd century. He was lashed and whipped for this. So Imam Ahmad was very strict regarding anyone who gave in when it comes to this mas'ala. So Mudhahibi says, I do i'tidar on behalf of Imam Ahmad. However, this individual, Ismail ibn Ulayyah, his ahadith are in all of the books of Islam. So Bukhari, Muslim, Tirmidhi, all of them transmit from him. He's from the Rijal of Sitta, as we mentioned. So there's no doubt that he is an acceptable narrator. Na'am. And he had sons as well that were also narrators of ahadith, although he had one son who was actually a very strong Jahmi, who was called Ibrahim ibn Ismail. Ibrahim ibn Ismail, this son of him, was a very strong Jahmi. And they mentioned that he was from the Munadhirin, and he was from the Du'at of the Jahmiyyah. طيب. But overall, we say he was a very strong, Ismail ibn Ibrahim ibn Ulayyah, he was a very strong muhaddith and acceptable muhaddith. طيب. He narrates from Ziyad ibn Mikhraq. طيب. Salah time is near, so we'll stop over here inshallah, and we'll continue بإذن الله تعالى in the next lesson with the remaining of the chain and the remaining of the hadith.